Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how I made this ash and epoxy office desk with yellow and blue flowers in it to symbolize Ukraine. This is going to be a two-part video. In the first part, I'll walk you through how I did the base, and in the second part, I'll show you how I made the tabletop. So for the base, I started with 2-inch thick ash wood that I cut into equal lengths using my miter saw. My desk is going to be 29 inches tall, including a 2-inch thick tabletop, so each leg needs to be 27 inches high. I cut each piece to 28 inches to give myself some extra room to trim off after the glue up. Next, I needed to create straight edges for the glue up. Since I don't have a jointer, I decided to use my table saw for this. I created this jig with a factory edge piece of plywood that's going to run along the fence and then clamps to hold down the wood. Once I had one straight edge using this jig, I was able to cut the other end of the wood with the edge that I just created as a reference. I then played around with the board layout for the glue up, trying to make the width as close as possible to the final width of my legs. Once I had the board arrangement that I wanted, I used a doweling jig to add holes along the length of the board, and this is just going to help with alignment of the boards during the glue up. I applied glue to each edge, then added my dowels and clamped the boards together using pipe clamps. I removed the clamps the next morning and used a chisel to lightly take off some extra glue. I then cut the boards to size using my track saw and sanded them to get the rest of the glue off. For the next step, I wanted to add leveling feet to each leg. Because this table will be going into a basement, I wasn't sure how level the floor would be, so I decided to use 4 leveling feet per leg. I wanted the leveling feet to countersink into each leg, so I had to create holes to house them. However, because I don't have a drill press, I had a really hard time drilling through the end grain of this ash wood with a Forstner bit, so I made this template instead, which I then used to start a hole with a flesh trim router bit. Because my flesh trim router bit cuts only about 1/2 inch deep, I only started the hole using my template as a guide, and then I'll cut deeper into the wood later. Next, I use this portable drill press to drill into the center of the hole, and this will house a threaded insert that the leveling feet will then screw into. Once this was done, I used the same flush trim bit to create a hole that was the same depth as each leveling foot. I then sanded the hole and used an 1/8 inch roundover bit to smooth the edges. I used a little bit of epoxy glue to insert the threaded insert. And then the leveling feet screwed right in. I wanted to use beams to fit into the legs of this desk, so I created another template to cut out slots into which the beams would fit. I used 1/4 inch plywood for this template, and I used a spiral upcut bit with a guide bushing to make the cuts. I did shallow passes with my router, taking off about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of material each time until the slot was half the depth of the width of my beams. Next, I cut the beams to width using my track saw. And I cut slots in the beams using the same template, router bit, and guide bushing that I used for the slots in the legs. And here are all my cut beams. As you can see, some of the slots that were cut in the beams were slightly close to the edge of the wood, and just because of the way the grain direction is running in these beams, it creates a slightly weaker spot in them. In order to strengthen the wood in these spots, I decided to create end caps using this beautiful black palm that I found on sale. I cut the wood into slots with my table saw that I then cut using my miter saw. I then glued this to the end of the beams just to create a little accent cap and provide that little bit of extra support to that area. After that, I used my roundover bit to smooth the edges of the legs and the beams, and I gave everything another sand. I hand sanded the slots and the leveling feet holes. Because I wanted two of the legs to be the sides of a filing cabinet, I had to cut doors for the filing cabinet to close. And for this, I followed the same steps as for the legs, of cutting the wood to size, creating a straight edge with a table saw, drilling holes for the dowels, and gluing up the wood. I then cut the doors but left them a little bit large so I can trim them to size when my table is fully assembled. Now for this table, I wanted to use Rubio Monaco in the color neutral. So for this, I first cleaned all of the wood with mineral spirits. Rubio recommends that you use their special wood cleaner, but I've used mineral spirits before and they've worked really well for me, so I just used that. After cleaning the wood, I mixed the Rubio with accelerator and rubbed it into the wood. And I left it on for a few minutes and then rubbed it off with a clean rag. I wanted to be able to screw the beams to the legs just to add more stability to the base and to keep the legs from moving. For this, I used a doweling jig to drill a hole in the beam, and then I aligned the beam with each leg and drilled a hole through the leg. I used a countersink bit to countersink each hole. I then added my threaded inserts to both the beam and the leg. And this allowed me to insert a screw through the beam and into the leg to keep the base steady. I had to cut the bottom of a section of the beam that will sit in front of the filing cabinet. For this, I used multiple small passes of my track saw, fitting the beam over to avoid cutting into the rest of the beam. I used a handsaw to cut the rest of the section off. And that's it for part 1. Don't forget to watch part 2 to see how I made the top of the table and to see the finished product.